All right, the next item on our agenda is public comment. So if there's anyone present online or in the room who would like to make a comment, this is your opportunity. Overall public comment is limited to 30 minutes and each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Looks like we have Mr. Arkeson.
Just be fair and honorable.
I think first come, first serve.
For the record, my name is Pete Arkeson. I'm a lawyer up in Bellingham. And I got a couple of handouts here. But first, I'd like to hand out the Legislative Review Committee volunteer position description. I think if I did this right, I made 19 copies for you people. I think I put everybody around the table. And I don't know how to send copies to the people in remote spots at the moment. The issue that I am concerned with is that you have a review committee that looks at legislation before it comes to the Board of Governors to be recommended to be approved or disapproved for the legislature to act on. If you read the Legislative Review Committee, or let me back up. I was present at the November meeting in Bellingham. At that meeting, there were 2 lawyers that came from, I suspect, the Legislation Review Commission or Committee. And they spoke about having a change made to the corporation or the Corporation Act. A member of the Board of Governors, I don't remember who, because I hadn't planned this at that time, asked if everybody, all interested parties had been contacted concerning this change. And the 2 people said yes. Now, I've been a member of the Bar Association for more than 3 years. I won't tell you how many, but it does come in the land of 4-digit bar numbers. And in all those years, I have never seen anybody solicit my opinion on prospective legislation or changes to prospective legislation. And I would presume they have come before this board and one of the governors has asked, did everybody get, all interested people get the opportunity to comment? Well, I'm sorry, but that's not the way it seems to work in real life. Legislation comes through and it seems to go to maybe a section. It gets put together, and I'm going to assume that in a section, and it gets put together, it comes to the board, and well, yes, the people in the section that put the thing together are going to say, yes, this is a good piece of legislation. What about all the other lawyers in the Bar Association who may be impacted by the change in the legislation? There is no time, there is no input, there is no hearing held, there is no notice given as to what is going to be proposed. Now I have another handout. This one also has 19 copies and didn't see any extras make it to the far end of the system, but there should be a couple left over, but now this is a law that apparently came out of the creditor-debtor section. For many years, I belonged to the creditor-debtor section because of my life as a bankruptcy lawyer. I got tired of being ignored by the section leadership. It did not seem to find a reason to think that I was worthwhile and important. Even though if you take a look at the various advanced sheets that come out and so forth, you'll find even though I'm not an appellate attorney, I have 22 cases that have ended up as reported decisions. You know, I'm getting close to having my own book if they all got put into the same spot. One of those is the United States Supreme Court decision. There are 9 current Court of Appeals decisions. And when the Court of Appeals rules on this brief, we're going to have 10 Court of Appeals decisions, and I have over a 75% win rate. So I am interested, I am involved. But that proposed law that you see there went through, and nobody ever told me there would be a hearing or a discussion on the law. It was just put through. And I think that there is something seriously missing that the Board of Governors needs to take a look at. What is happening and why? And is everybody that's interested in the legislation being contacted or given notice of it? Now, you might want to change, might want to change the law that affects family law. They do not know, because they were in silos, as some people call it, cylinders as I call it. We are all in these little things, and we do not know what goes in, for the most part, goes on with regard to the other laws. So we end up with something called the law of unintended results. I think that this, at a minimum, needs to be looked at carefully and hearing provided. The legislation, if I understand the review or the job description, starts its work somewhere in about April or May, or possibly even as early as March, so that all the information can be available for the November meeting. Now, there is a problem with that. You appoint new board members sometime in June or July now. And by the time new members get appointed, the committee has done a big chunk of its work for the year. There needs to be a way that new people can be put on that committee so that they can start out and make a positive contribution from the beginning. Now, why do I have a little temper tantrum? The law that you have there in front of you made serious modifications that affect bankruptcy and exemptions, property that can be claimed as exempt. When I get a couple of trustees to give me a call and say, I got a case with some money in it, I expect to take this law on. There are, depending on how you factor a couple of things, there are 4 different ways that this thing can be held to be invalid or unconstitutional. Article 1 of the United States Constitution says that Congress shall make a uniform law concerning bankruptcy, which I happen to be intimately familiar with, but I'm sure there's similar type things in other areas. Congress passed the bankruptcy law, bankruptcy code. There are very limited things that the states can do. One thing is to provide exemptions. Well, what they did in this law is they not only said that you can have effectively an unlimited exemption, because very few people show up in bankruptcy and have $700,000, which is, I believe, the median home price for King County. And plus a mortgage, 700,000, you're never going to sell any property. Creditors are never going to get any money.
Mr. Arkson. Oh,
yeah.
sorry. Just want to let you know, if you're over time, if you could just sort of come to your conclusion.
Well, I'm trying to say that I think there is something major that's needed. I know that I needed more than 3 minutes. There was no way that I could ever get this, and I still. Well, you got basically the condensed Reader's Digest version of it. There is something major that needs to be done, because this law really is a bad law. It should never have gotten through, but it did. And it probably never would have gotten through if there was a hearing process or an opportunity for people who disagree with the law, the language of the law, let alone what the law purports to do. Now, does anybody have any questions? Did I totally snow everybody?
Alec.
So this is not so much a question, but I'm looking at our communications officer and our legislative manager is not here. So the first time I'm just going to say, because it's not a question, which is that one, I would work off of the assumption that during the legislative process, there was a hearing by the legislature, which is the proper entity when they're considering bills. But besides that, it appears to me that you've raised whether you've been given notice as a member about bills that are coming up, and maybe we can do something about that to make sure. Understanding that what we're talking about as it relates to session is our ability to send the water out of the fire hydrant to all of our members, for them to take on the responsibility of sifting through what bills are coming up that you or any of our other members may want to engage in. And so if I understood you correctly, you were not aware that this bill was dropped, and maybe we can do something about that, not just for you, but for all of our members. So all of our members can, as they see fit, engage in the process, both with not only the Legislative Review Committee, and by the way, governors, I've always been somewhat mystified about the Legislative Review Committee and the Legislative Committee, which meets almost every week during session. But in any case, maybe there can be a communication between you and our communications officer, as well as our legislative manager, not in terms of the merits of how you feel one way or the other about any particular legislation, but how we can do our best to ensure that members are aware that various bills are coming up to be considered.
Well, that wasn't quite where I was trying to come from. Look at the law the way it was written, and it was poorly crafted. And I'm saying that it should never have gotten out, saying it is a piece of something that we can support. It needs to be, if it's poor language, poorly written, they could be sent back to whoever brought it forward and say, let's clean up the language so we don't have a constitutionally impaired law going out the front door. That's where I'm trying to come from. I'm not trying to say the merits of good or bad of that is. I'm just trying to say the way it came out and drafted is the problem, and it's not you're not hearing about the problems on the front end.
Thank you so much. Okay, next let's go to Nancy Hopkins.
Thank you. Let me, just before I launch into something else, I would urge the prior speaker to get back involved with the bankruptcy section, because surely they would be getting these draft bills from the from the office, and that's the opportunity to make comment. And as far as poorly drafted bills, often proposed bills come to us, come to sections, but we're not the ones that did the drafting. It's some legislator or group of legislators. And at some point you make decisions whether it's, what we can do, because we can't rewrite every bill. They don't want to hear those kind of edits from us. We often are limited in what suggestions we can make that legislators will listen to. I do have a number of comments that I think are probably best made a little later on, unless the president or the executive director thinks this is the better time. And my other additional comments would be about sections and volunteer activities. But at this point, what I wanted to remind everyone is the number one way to keep volunteers involved, to have people know about or care about what the Board of Governors does, is still the age-old problem. You can't release materials 1 week before the Board of Governors meeting. It is just insufficient time to read and process and think about and comment on hundreds of pages of materials. When I went through the materials for this meeting, there were a number of items that were dated many days before they were submitted on the website. Can't the organization move the due date and enforce it to at least 2 weeks before the Board of Governors? Give us a chance to get more involved. The routine of late materials and now late materials is just got to stop. There's, an organization of this size, with the number of employees, with the number of governors that we have, should be able to put together its materials a couple weeks ahead of an important meeting that costs a lot of money and for which people often travel to attend. I don't know what's scheduled for this afternoon, but until just a few days ago, in fact, I checked today and it still reflects that the BOG meeting today is an all-day meeting. It's only when you look at the agenda that, just came out. Do we hear that there's a closed meeting? No explanation, no description, no reason why it's closed. That's not a way to encourage volunteers. So I guess then I would ask Dan and Tara, do you want to hear some more comments about keeping volunteers or getting volunteers, or should I wait till after those reports?
No, I mean, it's awesome now. Yes, please do right now. Thank you so much.
Page 39 of the materials, section volunteers are not included in the demographic tally. I don't know why. Somewhere else in the BOG materials is listed that there are 35, I think it was, vacancies for section executive committees. I think the answer to filling those vacancies might be a systemic issue. If it's smaller sections where there's a smaller number of lawyers, so there are fewer people to choose from who might even be interested, that needs to be addressed perhaps in a systemic way. And all the questions that I was seeing in the materials were, let's question people about why they won't volunteer. Well, how about the flip side that's a little more positive? Why don't we interview people and ask them why they are volunteering, what they do enjoy about their work in sections? That's a very different approach than sort of the self-punishing, what are we doing wrong? Although, as you all know, I'm always happy to give you a list of the things that I think you're doing wrong. But we can also look at what's happening right, because I think that the sections people that I talk to in my section and others are enthusiastic about their work, love doing it, do it for many years. And, that's certainly been my experience as well. So I would say, if you really have 35 vacancies in sections, ask some of us to have a little brainstorming session. Let's find out where the problems are. Let us help you, as opposed to going out there and asking a bunch of, strangers, for want of a better phrase, why they won't volunteer. There was a question in the materials about how can we, how can we show more appreciation, I think it was, for volunteers, something like that. And of course, the huge issue over the past few years has been that volunteer work is congratulated with some amount of lip service only. And there are two committees that I can recall in the last several years: the Civil Rules Committee or Work Group and the Mandatory Insurance Work Group. And I may have the titles wrong, but the group that worked for, I think it was 7 years on proposed civil rules changes, and the Mandatory Insurance Group that I think also worked for several years. It got to the Board of Governors and was pretty much trashed in one meeting. There was, the explanation, one of the explanations about the civil rules was that the chair of that committee hadn't called back the governor that had left him a message. That kind of pettiness does not encourage more volunteers. Both issues had serious issues that needed discussion, absolutely. But there has to be a way that the Board of Governors doesn't always just take reports from groups that have worked really hard and just throw them away and start from scratch. At some point, we have to each, in our own little worlds, accept that somebody else's opinion has at least as much value as our own, and not necessarily start from zero and rewrite something. Or if you're going to do it, don't form these groups and encourage them to work for months and years at a time. A number of the people on the Civil Rules Group and the Mandatory Insurance Group left the organization not to return after years of service. That was caused by the way they were treated when they made their recommendations. It could have been handled differently, and the organization needs to figure out a way to handle those things differently. With regard to sections.
Nancy, I'm going to ask you to wrap up if you can.
Okay, I will. Sections in particular have endured the last couple of years at least of really fighting for our very existence in this organization. Don't assume that the fatigue of volunteers after a pandemic and after really all the nastiness of the last couple of years at the board level, that these are systemic organizational problems that need some massive overhaul. I think give people a little bit of a break. The pandemic has, I know from our own nomination process that people say, this year's just been too tough. How about, but next year, call me next year. I hear that from other people as well. So ask us for help. Listen to us sometimes. I won't even bring up the legislative policy stuff. You've heard that from me before. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nancy. Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands. Are people here in the room to, oh, I see Alex hand. Okay, I spoke too soon. Sorry, Alec.
I'll let you off the hook this time, Mr. President. No, but seriously, I would just hope, especially as it relates to volunteers, that, and I'm looking at Ms. Erickson as well as Director Nevitt, that perhaps this is a real focused conversation that especially the sections need to have with WSBA about, you know, the whole issue about systemically how fewer people are stepping forward. But I also suggest that finding out some of that information is not, to me, a binary choice. I think it's important to ask people who are on sections or who are volunteering why. I think it is important to ask the rest of our membership who are not, just get a sense of why not. And a whole lot of that, by the way, has to do with, and I speak this as a 40+ year member of the Bar Association, but only maybe a 15-year member actually being involved directly with the Bar Association. But it's not because I was not interested, but it was because I was working, for example, with my minority bar association. You know, there's only so much of us to go around, but if we can get just a sense of that, I think that will be helpful. And of course, it never hurts at all to keep asking, keep reaching out.
Thank you, Alec.